Welcome to Halal Money Matters. I'm Christopher Patton.
And I'm Monem Salam.
We're fortunate to have another exciting guest on this episode, Dr. Miles Davis, president of Linfield University. He's an author, a leader in faith-based entrepreneurship, and just happens to serve on the board for the Amana funds. And we're kind of tackling a couple different topics in this episode too. And one is to talk about entrepreneurship in Islam. And you spend a lot of time, in the communities. Do people ask about this topic?
The entrepreneurship is very similar to the investing part of Islamic investing because, I think people know that they shouldn't be involved with the alcohol part of it and those type of things. But sometimes we do get this question about, the Islamic investing allows you to do 33% in debt or 5% in alcohol. Why can't I do that in my own business? That we get that all the time. But more importantly, I think what's really important for people to remember is that, what really people wanting is advice on how to raise money, how to make sure that it's Islamic, all of those things. So I think those are the two branches or two areas that really get a lot of questions.
We also want to talk to Dr. Davis about the financial side of the Black Lives Matter movement and ways that maybe investors can be advocates, or is there an obligation as an investor or as an Islamic investor to kind of keep an eye on companies and how they're associated with that movement?
Yeah, it's really, really exciting. He's African-American, not only coming from Philadelphia, but also, growing up in an African-American community. I'm sure he has a lot on his mind when it comes to Black Lives Matter.
Sure. All right, well, let's get right to it. Just to jump right in, what are we talking about when we talk about entrepreneurship from an Islamic perspective? Is it a question of what does it look like? Or is there even more of a base question before that of, is it permissible?
That's an excellent question. So let's be clear, because it's important to understand words within that context. The word entrepreneur is a relatively recent word. The simplest definition is where you are responsible for the means of production. You are the owner of that particular thing. You are not working for someone else. You're working for yourself. During the time of the Prophet Muhammad, they didn't use that word entrepreneurs. There were other more common words that are relevant to words that we do know, such as traders or merchants. And so there are two things that I draw upon, and there's a paper that I have published on this called An Islamic Model of Entrepreneurship, which anyone can Google and find. You can go to Google Scholar and find it. It's been circulated quite a bit. Which addresses that what I think is the foundation of Islam, because the first convert to Islam was the Prophet Muhammad's first wife, Khadijah. So why is that relevant? Because Khadijah came into contact with the Prophet Muhammad because she learned of his reputation. And now listen to this, Chris, because this defies all stereotypes about Islam. She hired him to work for her and represent. And so not only is entrepreneurship at the heart of Islam, but women owning businesses are at the heart of Islam. So now I'm getting controversial. People are like, oh my gosh, you can't say this type of stuff. But it's true. It's a historical truth. And she represented him. Why? Because he was considered trustworthy and truthful, and she wanted him to represent her. And this is a woman that had the largest caravans. And when she went to Yemen, her caravans were bigger than all the other caravans put together. So she was an extremely successful merchant and trader, and she hired the Prophet. And I would say, now we're entering into the realm of my opinion, so people are free to disregard this, but because she was a wealthy merchant and trader, it was part of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's plan to allow the Prophet Muhammad to be successful, because he had the backing in order to make independent decisions without necessarily being tied to various other institutional structures. Now, let me tell you where that goes for me. The next leap in my mind about why entrepreneurship is not only halal, permissible in Islam, but I would even offer it is the preferred form of Islam. And it's for a number of reasons. So let me start with a hadith from the Prophet Muhammad. So when a man, and forgive me for my imprecise narration, but anybody can verify, they can take the keywords and go look it up for themselves. And so when a man came to the Prophet Muhammad and he wanted to marry, of course, I'm paraphrasing now. The Prophet says, okay, so you want to get married, what's your issue? And the man basically says, well, I have no means of earning a living. I have no way of doing anything. And, the Prophet said, okay, well, actually you do. And the man's like, okay, what do you mean? So basically then the Prophet told the man to go cut a bundle of woods, to put them on his back and go sell them. That's entrepreneurship.
So, but I think you make a very highly important point in the very beginning, that Khadija, who was the wife of the Prophet, was an entrepreneur. A lot of scholars think that the funding of Islam in the early years actually was because of the fact that she had her independent wealth. But it's not only the funding, it's the independence of it, right? I mean, for example, Abu Hanifa is another one. The reason why he was able to come up with his opinions that he did was because he wasn't reliant upon the state to give him money or anybody else. He had his own businesses to do that. Yeah. Very, very important point to make. And you mentioned something about one of the companions. I want to give you another example just to kind of share. And that was with Abdurrahman ibn Auf. It was one of the wealthiest of the wealthy, right?
Yes.
When he first got to Medina, when his brother, quote unquote brother, said, take whatever you want from whatever I have, he said, nope, all I want is you show me where the marketplace is. And then when the short period of time, he had enough money to buy himself some new clothes, enough to that the Prophet walking past him was like, oh, I smell something good on you and you're wearing new clothes. And this was within a few days of being able to do that. So I agree with you that a lot of encouragement towards doing things on your own.
So it seems that the heart of it is to not just provide for yourself, but to improve your community, so that people have the freedom to make their own decisions and pursue their faith within a structure that works for them.
It's a really good point. In our community in the U.S. and unfortunately, maybe people don't even realize that they're entrepreneurs, but they really are, right? So, for example, in our community, when youngsters are growing up, you're like, you have to become a doctor or an engineer, right? But the thing is that a lot of the people that are saying that are themselves are the ones who are owning their own businesses, restaurants. So they're doing it themselves. But then also a lot of doctors have their own practices, which is also entrepreneurship, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's kind of within the fabric of our community. It's already embedded. I just don't think people have kind of said, oh, yeah, I am an entrepreneur.
Yeah. And so what people need to primarily understand is not to look at entrepreneurship from the perspective of, how innovative or creative it is. I think that it would help a lot of us to see ourselves differently if we looked at what we did and the ability to more or less control what it is we're doing. And so a doctor who is in entrepreneurship has a practice. And yes, they have to answer patients or anything, but they're not necessarily working for someone else. They're working for themselves. And I will tell you why I got excited as a matter of a personal thing about entrepreneurship, because of reading about these examples in Islam. I have a lot of Muslim friends who are employees, and I'm making a distinction now between employees and entrepreneurs. And you want to know what they have problems with? I can't go make salat because my boss won't let me go. Brother Miles, I wish I could attend Juma. My boss won't let me go. When you own the thing, you're like, okay, I'll be back. I'll talk to you in a few. When you're in control. But even, I would encourage people even to extend, if I could, Chris, we talked about entrepreneurship. It's even entrepreneurship, because going back to the example with Khadija and the Prophet Muhammad, she empowered him, and another new word that we're using, she empowered him to do deals on her behalf. And he acted in her best interest because he was a trustworthy individual. And so that is entrepreneurship, as he was working for an entrepreneur. And so this is at the heart of Islam, to look at how you can improve your circumstances and create an environment that allows you in your community to flourish. And then let me give you the icing on the cake about this. All the time that you spend and making an honest living is considered time that you have spent in worship. It's incredible.
That's beautiful, Dr. Davis. Thanks for the reminder. It's so true. I want to step back a little bit and really talk about framework. So if you are an entrepreneur, I remember a quote or basically something that happened that when during the time of the Caliph Umar ibn Khattab, before you were allowed to be able to come into the marketplace and trade, you actually had to learn the rules of regulate, like the fiqh of trading. Living in America now, also obviously, you're on the board of the Amana funds, not only just the president of Linfield University. What would be a good framework to look at from a Muslim perspective and say this is what I can't do from not only from an Islamic perspective, but then also then from just a societal and Muslim perspective as well?
I think that we need to understand what does God expect of us? And I can refer you to verses in the Quran to substantiate this. He expects us to engage in fair dealing. Then I'll add something if you want to get more nuance, which underpins a lot of Islamic thinking about entrepreneurship as well as Islamic economy, is that money and money making doesn't exist just for the sake of making more money. You're supposed to do something with that money. It's flooding into my head all the rules that I learned, which quite frankly have led me to the position I'm in today. So like, for instance, unlike, when I was in business school and I was dean of a business school, and they always teach you, to get money fast from people and pay them as late as possible. But that's not the Islamic model. Matter of fact, the Hadith says that you should pay a person for their work before the sweat is dry on their brow.
Yeah, that's an interesting point that you mentioned. I mean, you're talking about learning in business school and those type of things. And in business school, you're initially taught, that it's shareholder value, at any cost. Shareholder value, that's the one. And slowly now, over a period of many years, now they're saying no. There's also stakeholders. There's also societal costs. You have to factor all of those things in. So just then, kind of branching off of that, your opinion about where does Islam lie in the middle, or what does the Prophet Muhammad or God say about this situation? Is it the business that you're in? And I think I already know the answer, but I want you to explain to me more. Is that is it just about the shareholder value and maximizing that, or is there some higher purpose that we have toward these businesses that we do?
What Islam teaches is that and I've actually written about this, is more consistent with the move away from pure shareholder maximization to what is we call stakeholder theory, is that you're impacted and you're impacting people by what it is that you're doing. And so you have to take in consideration. So not only Islam was ahead of its time in terms of what we now call stakeholder theory, it was also ahead of its time for what we now call CSR, or corporate social responsibility. Because you always had an obligation, quite frankly, it was ahead of its time in what we now call environmental stewardship. These are all fundamental constructs of Islam, is that you have to take care of these things. The people who are invested in you create sustainability, but you create sustainability of your reputation on top of everything else, not just the business model. So it's not just returning the highest profit, it's returning something that is sustainable in the long run, as opposed to just a short term, do whatever it takes, and the heck with anybody else. I don't know whether that's the answer you were looking for, but
we kind of touched around it, but something that comes up on this show, either directly or indirectly, whether we're talking about mortgages or your retirement account or whatever, is it harder to be an entrepreneur and to have these additional considerations?
Yeah, it's otherwise known as the Muslim tax. Matter of fact, we might even have a chance to talk about what they refer to as the black tax later on too, but the Muslim tax. And so, look, when I go out to eat, it's a lot easier for me to get a pork chop sometime. But why don't I? I don't get a pork chop because, I'm following a different code and standard. Do I feel as if I'm losing something in a short time because I can't have short ribs with Kansas City barbecue sauce? Maybe I am. And right now I live in Yamhill County. I'm in the middle of of wine country, Pinot Noir country. I had a guy over my house who sold a bottle of his wine for $50,000. Am I missing something because I didn't get to taste that $50,000 wine? Believe me, I was very tempted because I want to know what $50,000 wine tastes like. So yeah, maybe, but it's why am I here? And the purpose of my existence isn't to have, talk about maximization of shareholder value. It isn't to maximize the enjoyment of this life. That the purpose of life is to get to the afterlife. And that often requires sacrifice. But I will tell you this, but I have found that my life has been enriched, even financially, by following Islamic principles. Not investing in what has come to be called sin stocks is actually a good thing because they don't get in trouble. Also, Islam abhors debt and the paying of interest. So guess what I don't have, Chris? I don't have any credit cards with debt on them. So that makes me one of the rarest things in the United States of America, a black man with a perfect credit score. I'm following, Islamic principles that engage my life. I don't spend beyond my means. I help support my community. I do what I can. And so I always think about, why are you doing this? It's about, quite frankly, for me, it's about maximization of blessings, about how do I increase the real wealth, which are the blessings in my life and the positivity that is brought into my life as a result of doing the right things for the right reasons.
Well, to pivot topics a little bit, you mentioned what you call the black tax. And as a Black entrepreneur, we'd like to speak with you a little bit about the Black Lives Matter movement and how that pertains to investing and finance.
Yeah, and particularly what is the responsibility of shareholders, and maybe not necessarily of the Amana funds, but potential investors and companies involved with the African American community or involved in the Black Lives Matter movement. What's a good starting point to look at?
We cannot have a conversation about this in the 21st century in 2020 without understanding the history of this country. And there's two distinguishing periods that are worth examining in regards to this conversation. One is during the time of Jim Crow and post-Jim Crow era in the United States. So the Civil Rights Act was passed in 1968, which prohibited official discrimination. And so for those who are looking for a date, I would offer 1968 as a distinctive date. But I want to encourage people to look at the history of two states in relevant to this conversation. When we had a segregated society, Blacks owned more businesses than they do right now. Now, and if you want to see an example and then what happened to them, you need to look at Oklahoma and look at Black Wall Street, and then look at Florida, had a similar community. Because when Blacks were forced to do business with each other, they created entrepreneurs out of the communities that served them. So if you could not stay at any hotel, you had to stay at a Black-owned hotel. If you couldn't eat at any restaurant, you had to eat at a Black-owned restaurant. If you couldn't get insurance, you had to buy insurance for a Black person. And so people started businesses to take care of the community and allow wealth to be circulated in the community. And I'm not going to give short change to the fact that those communities were intentionally destroyed by the white community of the time because they began to envy what was happening there. But I don't want to dwell on that particular point. What I want to dwell on is what happened as we move forward from 1968. Because Black Americans, and I have to be clear about this, because most people in the United States look at pigmentation and determine that their person is Black, but Black Americans have a different behavioral pattern than Black Caribbeans or Blacks from Africa.
Let me just stop you. I was in Minneapolis very shortly thereafter the whole thing happened with George Floyd. And I didn't realize that the Somali community there who lives adjacent to the African American, the Black community, they don't actually 100% get along, which is interesting to me, because within one generation, the Somali community, nobody would know the difference between them and then
yeah, and but they feel it. And as somebody who was married, I mean, you knew my ex-wife, Carol, was Haitian, and I got exposed to this quite a bit about the distinctions and perceptions and the things that are going on. And so part of what that feeds into this, and I'm sorry, I'm not going to spend too much time on the sociology of this, but it's relevant to understand wealth creation in this country, is that Black Americans have always been taught that they are less than. And so what has fed into them is desire for acceptance, particularly in white society. What does that mean? Is that post 1968, that Black Americans believed that the water that white people drank was wetter than the water that they drank. And so rather than go patronize a Black business, they would often go patronize a white business and not keep the money inside the community, which allowed for no transfer of wealth. And this persists in some degrees today. And so even though it's interesting in the era of Black Lives Matter, I'm starting to see for the first time promotion that this business is Black owned, you need to support it. But there are three things that older Black Americans of my generation, so for the listeners on the podcast, just so that I can date myself, I'm 61, but there are three, maybe four businesses that they're aware that were Black owned that are no longer Black owned. One is BET, Black Entertainment Television, owned by Sheila and Bob Johnson. And now owned by Viacom. The other one was Johnson Publications that owned Jet and Ebony Publications. Again, no longer owned and quite frankly, barely in existence. And another one was Gaskin. Most people are aware of the history of Gaskin, who still runs an insurance company, one of the most successful insurance companies. These are incredible businesses. But outside of that, there are none of those businesses. And then if you look at that in comparison to, even as I look at you, Monem, your family is second and third generation, but they came over, established a foundation and did some things. That just has not happened in the Black American community. And then if you throw in issues of redlining and restrictions of wealth, and even, quite frankly, in the era of PPP loans, and look who's getting the money, that minority businesses are not getting the money because they don't qualify, because many of them are sole proprietorships and they don't have the structures to make this happen. They're being left out. And so the gap wealth and the wealth, the two things that provide access to wealth, which is home ownership and owning businesses, have been denied to Black Americans. And unfortunately, there's not enough often internal belief to do some of the things that some of the Caribbeans or the people come over from Nigeria, where they support each other and build up the communities to allow it to happen, so that they can fund themselves instead of having to go to the man. That was an air quotation for those of you who are listening.
But even during this coronavirus epidemic, and not only, we have the statistics on how it's affecting the African American community more just on the virus side. But now you're looking at it from the economic side. And if you look at traditionally owned Black businesses are restaurants and barbershops, and those are the ones that are being shut down because of
sole proprietorships. They're sole proprietorships. They often don't have accounting relationships. They don't have legal relationships. The foundations that, again, I learned in my fine business education that you need to have when you go into business, they don't have those things. They had nobody to file the paperwork, the work, and by the time they got the paperwork filed, the money was spent. And so you fall further and further behind on the economic ladder. And it's, and people talk, it's always amazing to me when people say that they're not racist. And I don't like calling people's names, but here's what I am clear, is that you don't have to be racist to perpetuate a racist system. And so unless you affirmatively are taking steps to say, okay, how can we help these communities? Because I got news for you, Monem and Chris. People who have full bellies, who own homes and have money in the bank don't riot. They don't own any of those stores. They don't own any of the businesses. If you want to stop riots in the street, invest in the neighborhoods that create opportunities for people to want to take care of themselves. And so, which all leads to the transference of wealth. And building in an era of Black Lives Matter, the reason, and Monem, you touched upon this earlier, is that COVID-19 isn't just a physical illness. One of the first things that the schools in McMinnville had to consider when they closed down was, how do we get meals to our students whose only real meal is when they come to our school? And unfortunately, too many of those people are Black and brown children. And then I'll offer this as a perspective. To jump to the other side of this, it's relevant to consider about owning the means of production. If you're worried about being discriminated against because you're Black, and I know this is, look, I'm very clear this is easier said than done, but if you own the business, you get to make a different set of decisions. So there are Black-owned banks that if you're worried about that, you need to engage in having conversations about. If somebody doesn't want or doesn't make the food you want, then do the work that's necessary. Even as we're talking about the challenges to that, how do you have things in your community that allow you to make decisions? And I'll just share this one last story, which shaped my thinking about this. Is when I was at Duquesne University, and I got to meet a gentleman that forever had an impact on my life. It was Dean Ronald Davenport. He was Dean of Duquesne University's law school, the first Black dean of a major white institution. And I showed up, and I know it's hard to imagine for those of you who are listening, you don't know that, my head is bald and it's shaved now, but I showed up back then in 1979 with my dashiki and my afro, and, all about power to the people. And Ronald Davenport, I went to see him because my father said I should. He was from Philadelphia, and I went in to see him originally. And he said, Miles, he says, I represent, I recognize and respect, what you're saying, militancy. He says, because I was in Pittsburgh, and he says, you can go downtown and throw pebbles at U.S. Steel and think you're making a change. Or you can prepare yourself to run U.S. Steel and make a real change. The final thing he said to me, he says, just because you wear a Brooks Brothers suit doesn't mean you have to have a Brooks Brothers mind. And so, I was taught that the way to power wasn't about the protest. The way to power was to be in decisions to hire and fire people, because then you overcome some of the structural barriers that people face in terms of discriminatory practices.
Maybe this is maybe related to that some, but let's say you're an investor who has been massively benefiting from a racist system and you want to make a change. I've heard you say before, that start with yourself, focus on yourself. Yeah. You're somebody that's looking at your wealth or your portfolio, like how different is it from being an Islamic investor where you're kind of having to keep an extra eye on things?
So Chris, that's a wonderful question. If I may be interpreted, it's like, okay, so I've made money, I've benefited from this. What do I do with the money? So let me be clear. Money in and of itself has no conscience. It's how it's earned. But here, let me give you a simple thing that I think that could benefit all of us. If you just took, let me pick out a number out of the air. If you just took 2.5%, if you just took 2.5% of the money that you had left over after you paid all your bills. So I'm not telling you to take it from the gross. I'm telling you to take it from the net. Take 2.5% of the money you have left over, and then use that money to reinvest in worthy causes or worthy individuals. You can transform society. Identify 2.5% of what you have left over, and take that and use that to invest in a business or use a startup. So it doesn't matter whether you make $100, you make $100,000, or if you make $1 million. 2.5% of what you left, take and invest that in a person or a business that you think is worthwhile, and just support it. And then along with that 2.5%, give them the most precious things you give them, Chris. The most precious thing, the non-renewable thing, which is your time. And say, I know you're that sole proprietorship, I know you're trying to get through school. I know you're trying to do this. Let me help you. Let me be there for you. Let me benefit you. If you even did the same equation, if you looked at the number of hours in the day, and instead of some of my friends that I know who play Madden or FIFA soccer for 4.5 hours at a time, and they took 2.5% of that and said, you know what, I want to take 20 minutes to speak with somebody who needs my help, you can transform the world. You can transform the world.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. So the interesting thing is, and I wanted to circle back to this thing, which is, that the ESG funds that we have, one of the things that we do on the governance side is to be able to look at the diversity of the board.
Yes.
As one of our criteria. And that's gender diversity, that's ethnic diversity, all the different things that kind of make up for that. So the question really becomes is that, what else can a shareholder do besides that? What else can we do to be able to, as a shareholder, not the fund, but just as an investor putting money to work for society? What can we do?
Investors need to realize that the board is there to represent shareholder value. And so one of the things that has happened in the era of Black Lives Matter is that a lot of organizations have given lip service to support diverse businesses. And quite frankly, their employees have begun to call them out on that. You're saying you're supporting diverse businesses, but if you look at your hiring practices, your promotion practices, and everything else, not so much. And so shareholders have to hold the board, which represents the shareholders, accountable for metrics that are meaningful. Giving lip service is not meaningful. And it's easy to give money and then walk away. What does it look like in terms of the decision making in the organization? What does it look like in terms of hiring promotion patterns? What does it look like in terms of fair equity in the organization? How are people treated? You use the term that we used in business school is a balanced scorecard model. What is it, not just the great returns, but how are people treated as part of this organizational structure? And shareholders have a responsibility to do that. Shareholders really do need to pay attention to what is put out in the shareholders report, and also pay attention to what is not put out in the shareholders report. And then they need to contact the board. I know that there's this term, activist shareholders. Well, doggone it, it's your money. You should be active about it, and let people know what it is you're thinking about how we can do better. And the board members need to realize that they're not just there to collect a paycheck and read over pro formas and approve things, that the job of a member of the board is to look out for the best interests of shareholders. And so they should at some point, besides being shareholders themselves, they should at some point be engaged in talking to shareholders to understand what shareholders are looking for, and think about the bigger picture. What is it that we say that we're about? So for instance, I sit on the board. Matter of fact, I'll give you two examples. I sit on the board of the Amana Mutual Fund, which is a board that is designed, it promotes itself as Sharia compliant Islamic investing. So clearly it was designed to serve the Islamic community, even though non-Muslims invest in it and do things. But our job is to make sure that we're following the prescriptions as best as possible, so that our shareholders don't have to worry about whether we're doing the right thing, but that our job is to monitor all this. So let me just say this then, as we begin to wrap up this podcast, let's be clear. Black Lives Matter is not a statement about exclusivity. The word Black Lives Matter is only missing a preposition at the end, which is the word to. It means Black Lives Matter too. For those who want to respond with all lives matter, that's not what it's about. We're asking for inclusion in that. But you cannot have a conversation about Black Lives Matter just from the perspective of policing. You have to have a conversation about Black Lives Matter from how are you taking care of a population that, quite frankly, has been handicapped. There is a structural reason why Black Americans are disadvantaged in this country. And if you want to create a United States of America that lives up to its promise, then you have to affirmatively engage in that process to create a system that works for everybody.
Dr. Davis, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. This is wonderful. Thank you, Chris, for all you did for the money. I hope to see you soon.
Thank you. Give my regards to your family.
Be well. Be blessed.
Take care.
Please consider an investment's objectives, risks, charges, and expenses carefully before investing. To obtain this and other important information about the Amana funds in a current prospectus or summary prospectus, please visit amanafunds.com or call toll-free 1-800-728-8762. Please read the prospectus or summary prospectus carefully before investing. Investing involves risk, including the risk that you could lose money. The Amana funds restrict investments to those companies consistent with Islamic and sustainable principles, which limits opportunities and may affect performance. This material is for general information only and is not a research report or commentary on any investment products offered by Saturna Capital. This material should not be construed as an offer to sell or the solicitation of an offer to buy any security in any jurisdiction where such an offer or solicitation would be illegal. We do not provide tax, accounting, or legal advice to our clients, and all investors are advised to consult with their tax, accounting, or legal advisors regarding any potential investment. Investors should not assume that investments in the securities and/or sectors described were or will be profitable. This podcast is prepared based on information Saturna Capital deems reliable. However, Saturna Capital does not warrant the accuracy or completeness of the information. Investors should consult with a financial advisor prior to making an investment decision. The views and information discussed in this commentary are at a specific point in time, are subject to change, and may not reflect the views of the firm as a whole. All material presented in this publication, unless specifically indicated otherwise, is under copyright to Saturna. No part of this publication may be altered in any way, copied, or distributed without the prior express written permission of Saturna Capital. None of the Amana funds own any securities of Viacom. Other companies mentioned in this episode are privately held.